Hello, this is John Kogan, the CEO of Proformative, the online community for corporate finance, accounting, treasury, and related professionals. I would like to welcome everyone to today's webinar entitled Best Practices, Aligning Financial Planning with Company Strategy in a Dynamic Environment. Advances in technology are creating opportunities to realize the benefits of creating better alignment of budgeting and forecasting efforts with strategic initiatives while operating in a dynamic financial planning environment. What does it mean for a company to move from a static to a dynamic planning and forecasting environment? How are companies leveraging technology and redefining processes to offer the right data at the right time to the right people within their organizations? Today's webinar content will include an overview of best practices in budgeting and planning, how current and emerging technologies enable the adoption of best practices, and a case study of how one company has leveraged technology in transforming from a static to a dynamic forecasting and planning process. A few items before we get started. First, I'd like to thank today's event sponsor, Host Analytics. Not only are they steeped in today's content, but also have provided us speakers. So thanks very much for Host Analytics, and we greatly appreciate their support now, as always. A few words about Proformative. For those who are new to Proformative, we are the largest and fastest growing online resource for senior corporate finance, treasury, accounting, and related professionals. We reach over 600,000 of those professionals on a monthly basis, many of them on our website, where folks exchange information in a trusted environment that is completely ad-free and noise-free. So it's a wonderful place to learn and help yourself get work done. Please check it out at proformative.com. We also put on educational events like the one you're participating in this morning or this afternoon, depending on where you are. A few notes on today's event. A link to today's presentation and a recording of this webinar will be sent out to all attendees within 24 hours of the event and will also be posted on Proformative at www.proformative.com/resources for a free download. If you would like to grab the deck now and download it, make notes, etc., feel free to do so. It is already up there at proformative.com/resources. To those who have registered for CPE credits, we will have 3 polling questions during today's event, more or less equally spaced throughout the presentations we'll be seeing today in our Q&A. You must answer all 3 of those questions. Now, these questions are statistical in nature, so they're not really a test of what you've seen, but we'd like to get input from the audience, and that includes people who are here not for CPE credits. So when I post those polling questions, we would greatly appreciate getting participation from everyone that's on board today. So thank you for your consideration there. If you have any questions about CPE credits, please contact Chris Brower, and you can see her email address right there at the end of that second bullet. Next up, we would like today to be an interactive experience. We have 2 experts who are steeped not only in corporate finance and accounting, but also in today's content and main topic, which is aligning financial planning with company strategy in a dynamic environment. So please feel free to ask questions of these folks. They're here, they're available, they're peers in many ways to the folks who are on this program. So if you take a quick glance at your GoToWebinar control panel, you'll see a segment there entitled Questions. You may need to expand it, and then you simply type your question out. We don't shout out your name with a question, so don't worry. It's anonymous to the audience here, and we definitely appreciate and welcome any questions. Now, the way this event will roll out is that in a few moments we'll begin the first presentation, take a quick break for a polling question, then a second presentation, then the second polling question. Then we will have our Q&A period, during which we will go through any questions that you ask, and then we'll have a final polling question right at the very end. Finally, you will be asked to take a short survey today regarding the webinar. We greatly appreciate your feedback. Also, if you would like to connect with our sponsor today or our speakers today, we make it very easy during that survey to make that request. So it's literally just a click of the mouse, and we're happy to help make those introductions. We have a number of learning objectives today, and I'm not going to go through these one by one, but we do want to help you discover best practices in aligning budgeting and forecasting efforts with your company's strategic initiatives. That's really the bottom line today. We all live in dynamic environments for our corporations, and we want to help you learn how to manage this process better and more effectively. That's what we're all about here today. And without further ado, I'd like to go ahead and introduce our first speaker, Alex Ortiz. Alex is Director of Product Marketing at Host Analytics. And as he heads up product marketing, he provides the only, for Host Analytics, which provides the only complete performance management suite for finance in the cloud. Prior to Host Analytics, he was a product marketer for Salesforce.com, the enterprise cloud computing company. Before that, he was a senior associate for Sierra Ventures, a top-tier Silicon Valley venture capital firm with over $1.5 billion in investments. Earlier in his career, Alex was an associate at Santander Bank's venture capital arm, B2B Factory Ventures. He has an MBA from UC Berkeley and a bachelor's degree in engineering from Cal Poly. Alex, thanks so much for joining us this morning. I greatly appreciate your time, and why don't I go ahead and let you take it away from here.
Great. Thanks, John. Well, it's good to be with you again, and I'm here really to do two things. One is to spell out what's happening in technology trends, and the second goal I have is to share what we see a lot of our customers doing to move the ball forward within the Office of Finance. Really, a lot of my experiences have been formed by I think, two things. One is on the venture capital side, seeing both the successes and the struggles of early-stage companies. Most people are aware that most mid-stage companies are, they struggle every month, every quarter, every year to hit plan, just as big companies do. And unfortunately, we see companies crash on the rocks of strategy and plan and misalignment all too frequently. And so it's a subject I care deeply about. Care deeply about the entrepreneurs that are putting together those plans and strategies and presenting them to the board. The second area that I'm going to tap into is just a lot of conversations with finance professionals that we work with here at Host Analytics. We learn from them, and we also hopefully return the favor and share best practices so they can move the ball forward. So let me dive into the presentation here. And first I'm going to start out just giving you a very brief overview of Host Analytics, the company. We're the leader in cloud-based financial applications, and really what Gartner would call corporate performance management or enterprise performance management. And what that is really a combination of the financial processes that most of the people on the phone think about today, budgeting, planning, forecasting, consolidation, close and disclose, financial reporting, ad hoc reporting, and analytics. And so it's, I would call a combination of processes all in one market sector. In terms of the cloud, we're in 2013. I think the cloud is turning from something that was adopted by innovators and early adopters, and now really hitting its stride in the mainstream. So I think most folks are familiar with the cloud. We see actually a shift in trend. In years past, the priority had been about cost reduction. Cloud companies tended to have a strong value proposition around cost reduction. Nowadays, we see companies really going after the benefits of agility, right? And that's a really cogent point to where we are today in a very dynamic economy with a fair amount of volatility. And so the ability to move along with that volatility has become more and more important. In terms of EPM and why companies pursue the software, generally it's three things. It's to help drive accountability across the company, to make sure that plans don't just sit within the Office of Finance, but department heads are empowered to act. Obviously, it's a lot about speed and moving from manual processes to automated processes. And really, I think the big picture is really to achieve better insights to help inform decisions and make better decisions. We feel Lucky to work with companies large, medium, and small. NEC is a great story of coming on and harnessing the value of the cloud. I'll share a bit of trivia. I love trivia, and WD-40 is a great brand. So for the longest time, I had no idea what WD-40 meant. And recently, we learned that WD-40 actually stands for water displacement, and 40 stands for the 40th recipe, so to speak, of the chemist there that got the recipe right. And so it was their 40th try for water displacement. And there you go. If you learn anything, you learn a good piece of trivia here with WD-40. But also, obviously, companies that are early stage here in Silicon Valley. We've got plenty of companies that are preparing to go public. Companies like Splunk who really want to get their financial house in order, as they file their S1s, and enterprise performance management software can certainly help in those cases. So let's talk about why we're here today. And just driving in, listening to the news, I hear about the GDP of the U.S. Having a slight contraction this last quarter. Obviously, we should all be aware of that information because it really does trickle down into industries, into companies, and sometimes into individuals' plans moving forward. And so I think we're in a heightened environment of awareness around macroeconomic disruption, and especially companies that are driven by commodity pricing. We've seen what the price of oil has done over the last 4 years. We've seen the big pullback in construction and hopefully the reemergence. And also financial services is still trying to move forward away from a place of infinite pain back in 2009. So we're all aware of the company dynamics of competitors launching new products, demand profiles changing, buying patterns changing, and it's probably no surprise to anyone on the phone today that strategies change, right? The day of a once-a-year strategy review are probably over in most companies. Certainly the ones we talk to are making big plans to do more iterative planning and including adjusting strategies as they do it. Now, some companies that come to us, they're really at the beginning stages of maturity in their financial processes, and to think about monthly planning cycles might make their head explode. But there's, I think, a few key things to remember in my overall message for today's best practices is technology exists to help, and it's becoming more and more accessible, more and more affordable, and a little easier than most folks would think to really move from what I would call more static planning to dynamic planning. So let's jump into a couple of the other themes, and there's some obstacles that companies are also facing. And it's not just the external environment and strategies changing, it's the tools that they have in-house to help them adjust to the change. So most companies start out using spreadsheets. Those companies get bigger, and then at some point in that company's life, they hit a wall. And they hit a wall with spreadsheets for a lot of reasons that I think most people are familiar with. They're hitting problems of just size, right? Sometimes these workbooks are 50 megabytes, really difficult to open and adjust. We love Excel, but it's not exactly designed for collaboration and workflow and approvals. And it's kind of hard to lock down sensitive data. The stat that I found probably most interesting out there was by a couple of business schools, and they said that 94% of spreadsheets have errors in them, and that's an astounding figure. I think, unfortunately, we've all been in board meetings where information is presented and something isn't adding up, and that is obviously a big credibility blow to everyone at the table. The second big challenge area that we see companies struggle with is what we call outdated software. There's now at least 4 or 5 major financial software products that are at end of life or end of support. Hyperion Enterprise, FRX, Cognos has various versions that are no longer going to be supported in 2013. And companies need to do something about that. Sometimes it's IT policy that basically says, we're not allowed to run on software that's unsupported. That tends to be more the case with public companies complying with SOX. But even companies that are just finally frustrated with inability to modify reports on their own, or to make changes to what might be a simple adjustment in a what-if model or analysis, and really they hit the breaking point. So we tend to see a couple things happening. One is, if there happens to be a change at the executive leadership level, new finance professional comes in, takes a look at all the spreadsheets that are all over the place and says, you know what, I used to do this in Hyperion, there's a better way, let's install something. So that's usually, trigger number one. Trigger number two is really people that just go through the planning cycle. And I think now that we're at the end of January 2013, maybe a lot of folks are feeling it, that what they just went through, they don't want to go through that again. And that's when projects get kicked off and people start looking for software solutions. So what about the cloud? So, most folks are familiar with the cloud now. They might be hearing some things. I think right now we're in a pretty interesting place. We have plenty of cloud companies, success factors, pretty interesting story in the human capital management sector. That recently got acquired by SAP. So some of the mega vendors are kind of waking up to realize that, these cloud companies, they're onto something. Companies like Salesforce with over 100,000 customers. Workday is making great progress within the Office of Finance and HR, and they're really enterprise-grade cloud applications. Right? They sell to some of the biggest companies in the world. Here at Host Analytics, we run on all cloud applications. We use NetSuite as our ERP. We use Paychex as well. And I think most companies have at least one SaaS or one cloud application within the four walls. And there's good reason for that. So, on the previous slide, we talked about end-of-life software. I think most folks that have been around the IT business realize that that's a real big problem, but there's also other big problems. And that is that IT budgets have been flat for the last 10 years. Most IT departments are not growing within companies, and their project backlog continues to increase. So if you're sitting in finance and you're asking for a project to get done, it's probably going to take a while. And the IT team generally wants to focus on projects that support the business. We've talked to a lot of healthcare companies where the real motivation and mission for IT is to support patient health and patient outcomes, not to support the financial applications that they need. So I think a lot of folks are looking to the cloud to be able to be more agile, so finance can basically run the application. They're looking to reduce upfront costs, so no hardware or software. The upgrades is a really interesting area. Some folks aren't familiar with this, and all this really means is, in the old style of software, a new upgrade might come out every 2 to 3 years and require a consultant to go on inside your company and redo a lot of the customizations that have been done the first time. That's just a really inefficient way to deliver software, and that's why I think the cloud is a really big deal. Clearly getting new features every quarter is an advantage a lot of people appreciate. And security is, I think, a more understood subject today than it was, say, 5 years ago. I think people have woken up to realize that a lot of their business information already is in the cloud. Whether you've used ADP to do your payroll. I mean, some people don't think about it as a cloud company, but how I think about it is you're sending sensitive information on compensation to a third party to help execute a financial process. And so most folks are getting familiar with the security levels, and really every single one of these cloud companies lives and dies by the integrity of their security, and their mission really is to provide a secure application. That isn't always the case in software that's been developed for deployment behind the firewall. So just always have that in mind and make sure you kick the tires and you look at the industry. Basically, there's a lot of third-party verification of security practices. Finally, the last big area is faster time to value. My CFO, Kelly Battle, she tells a great story of one of her former companies she was a CFO at, and they were trying to install Hyperion, which originally was supposed to take about a year and had X amount of budget. Unfortunately, it lasted 2 years and was double the budget, and so she unfortunately lived through that pain, and it bothered her so much so that the opportunity to come to Host Analytics was a really big one for her. She realized that the cloud offered a much different value proposition than what she had grown up using within her various finance roles. So a little bit more about enterprise performance management. So generally the way I think about things is there's plenty of software applications that can do, I'd call point solutions around maybe one pillar of enterprise performance management. There's plenty of low-end budgeting tools, but it's really only the tools that cover a breadth of financial processes that are included in enterprise performance management. So it really must have modules for planning, for consolidation, financial reporting, and ad hoc analytics. That's the basics. That's table stakes. And then occasionally you'll see vendors with some innovative things out there as well. So my recommendation is, after you think about, what are your requirements within supporting your financial processes, think two to 3 years out. Oftentimes we work with companies that, they're one entity, they're trying to get better at planning, and then 2 years out, they have a strategy change and want to acquire a company to help support growth through inorganic growth initiatives. If they don't have an application that brings in consolidation, they essentially have to replace the low-end budgeting tool that they had. And so, always think about long-term requirements if you do look at a software vendor for EPM, and clearly having some of those things as options to easily add on becomes more and more important. So, why does technology matter? Here's a really interesting survey by Dimensional Research. They basically interviewed over 500 finance executives, and we were really surprised with the results. Basically, finance recognizes that technology can improve business results. What to me was interesting was that they look to it to deliver competitive advantage and obviously produce better financial plans. At the bottom half of the slide, I think there's some good data to benchmark your own processes against. So this is basically what companies are doing today. And so I think most people in their jobs, what-if analysis is like drinking water. We're all running pivot tables. We're all thinking about changes that might need to be made to respond to strategy shifts. Revenue modeling, I'll talk a little bit more about this in some subsequent slides. I think there's a lot of innovation happening here. Profitability modeling, opportunity planning, these are things that I think most folks are familiar with. Over on the right-hand side, these are areas that some companies are doing, but most are not, right? So disaster planning. There was plenty of case studies produced about Hurricane Sandy and hitting the East Coast. Some companies were completely unprepared about that. Some weren't. And so I think the message here is it's really easy to optimize the day-to-day planning process, but also keeping an eye out on the future, whether it's disaster or even opportunity planning and broader range opportunity planning. Those are real areas of, I think, advancement that many finance professionals easily forget about in our day-to-day, but should also keep an eye out on. So now I'm going to shift into the next section of my talk, and that's really to highlight the best practices. I'm going to lightly hit on about 11 different financial processes. You might have more, you might have less. My goal here is to basically paint a picture of what companies are coming from and what they're going to and why. There's all sorts of resources to go deeper on any one of these subjects. Proformative does a nice job of going deeper. You can come to our case study section on hostanalytics.com to see what companies are doing. But let's just keep it at a high-level overview, and I'll touch on a couple of the important points. So first off is what we call table stakes, budget collection and approval automation. Unfortunately, we come across many companies where 80% of the time is spent collecting data. We all didn't go to college to monkey around with data collection or troubleshooting Excel spreadsheets. What we really went to college for was to use the tools, the analysis tools that we learned to make an impact, and to make an impact within finance and the broader organization. So I think the first best practice here is to make sure that you are freeing up time to go do that analysis. There's plenty of good software out there to help you automate the collection of budgets, the collection of plans, and making sure that that folks not only agree to the plan, but they're accountable. Time and time again, we hear of unfortunate ops reviews where a department head might say, "Hey, I didn't. That's not my number. I didn't, authorize that number." That's, these are things that are easily avoidable. It's hard to avoid them in Excel and some of the other older software programs, but it really is something that should be fairly straightforward to implement at your company. By doing so, you're really freeing up your time to be more value add to your company. With planning, oftentimes we see companies using financial data only. We call this driving through with a rear view mirror. It's pretty hard to anticipate a volatile macroeconomy by doing that. So what companies are doing is they're starting to look out at first at information that sits in their four walls. So they might be bringing in sales data from Salesforce.com. They might be bringing in marketing data from Marketo or Eloqua or whatever marketing automation tool you might be using. And finally, they're looking at economic indicators. They're looking at the price of oil. They're looking at housing starts. And all this is a way to drive plan accuracy. Gartner had a pretty interesting figure. They said companies that use leading indicators earn about a 5% improvement on return on equity. Can't tell you that that's always going to be the case, but there certainly is the proof point to make an initiative around using leading indicators and operational information. Moving on to revenue planning, I think most folks will do this, and they'll do it at a high level, maybe just bringing in their top-line sales figures into their operational plan and into their financial plan. What we see the gap with many companies is not getting to the next layer of detail because it's just too hard to do with the tools that people have. So oftentimes people either don't have the time or the tools to really do an analysis by sales rep, product SKU, customers, and really are lacking a way to drive top-line growth. And so there's plenty of good software out there that can bring together your sales plan and your ops plan in one place so it's not scattered across different spreadsheets that can become unlinked and basically unmanageable. On workforce planning, once again, this is a cost, one of the highest costs for most companies. Maybe it's 30, 50, sometimes up to 70% of the cost structure. And with all the changes in healthcare reform and benefits, it gets really hard to plan accurately. And so there's software exists to help you here, and it's really helping CFOs to drive the top level changes in the what if planning, but even helping the operational VPs so they're not spending time trying to calculate their payroll budgets and all the comp items and thinking about their variances, but really just delivering the information so they can manage their area. So best practice here is make sure that you can do this, and if you can't do that with the tools you have, it's time to look for some tools that can really support detailed workforce planning. Initiative planning, just to sum this up, it's really about having a portfolio of projects that have been thoroughly analyzed, both the sales, the OPEX, and the CAPEX needed to pursue them with some estimated IRRs along with it. And so we see a couple cases where companies are mingling in, CapEx decisions in with OpEx decisions, and it becomes actually really hard to separate some of those decisions out. And so your board is going to really appreciate IRRs on different portfolio options. That's really going to help strategy. Because obviously, people are weighing alternatives to strategic direction. Part of the budget is about funding the plan and funding the strategy, and portfolio modeling can help you get there. On forecasting, I think this, at least in 2012, rolling forecasts was the hot topic. Maybe most people are familiar with it. We find that companies are at varying degrees of maturity rolling these out. Really what they're trying to do is go from a place where it might take them 2 weeks to reforecast. That really prevents them reforecasting any more quickly than once a quarter. So what they're doing is they're looking to their processes and software to basically bring in actuals easily, bring them right next into the budget and the forecast, and get that information out to department heads quickly. So there's all different types of methods about how to go about rolling forecasts. I just suggest to read up more. We've got plenty of resources on our website, as does Proformative, because there's real considerations to make on how frequently should you roll, and really you want to tie things to your natural business drivers. So rolling forecasts, it's all about business agility, and companies are, I think, going from the interest area of 2012 to really implementing rolling forecasts in 2013. Ad hoc reporting, this area I think touches a sore spot for many finance professionals. It's raining down requests from all sides of the business for data, and oftentimes with old tools or with just Excel, it's really hard to get that data out and that information out. There's plenty of good software out there that helps you give controlled access, which is a really important point, controlled access to sensitive information, but also allows self-service reporting. So, a department head in operations can, go and investigate what's going on in his business without, burdening finance on what we would think is a, pretty important but time-consuming activity. So it's really all about fixing the bottleneck there and getting the information out to all points of the organization. With analytics, I think what we see some companies doing is they're trying to get to a place where their CEO and their board, when they ask them a question, when it goes into kind of, I call it ping-pong state, where there's a lot of questions about what if this happens, what if sales goes down 10%, what if this happens. Finance professionals really want to anticipate those questions and have that information ready. Nothing looks better than to be well prepared and having basically the information and software to help really support the detection and the answering of key strategic questions. I think that's the biggest place where we see finance professionals shining and assuming basically a seat at the table for some major decision making. Coming to the last two slides about strategy setting. So most companies realize, hey, we can't decide strategy just by looking at the information within our four walls. Environment's changing. Europe, the economy is all over the place. U.S. debt crisis. We got to keep an eye on that. Companies are really bringing in outside information. I think the big shift we see is, they might be doing this, but they tend to be doing it manually. And there's really easy integration points now where companies can bring in, kind of pipe in information from external sources right into their applications. And so, I just urge you to think holistically about the software and what it can do, because there really has been a lot of advances to help you set strategy. Finally, on strategy alignment, we see companies using scorecards. Formerly, scorecards, I think, were something that maybe the executive team might have and might be updated fairly frequently, but they haven't been pervasive across companies. The state of technology today is scorecarding dashboard. It should be so easy that everyone has their own personal dashboard that can help guide them on where the company's at, where their team's at, and where they're at against their goals. And this is probably one of the best methods to align individuals to company strategy. So it's really about sharing that visibility out so people can react and respond to a dynamic environment. And nothing makes me happier when we hear of a customer who, over the course of a couple quarters, produces insightful analysis and gets invited to the table. We've heard about a couple good promotions recently, and that's really what we're here for. We want to make sure that finance professionals are moving ahead in their career, being valuable players, and moving from a place where it was more about data collection and just reporting backwards-looking results, but really having a seat at the table. So with that, I'd like to hand it back to John.
Thank you so much for that, Alex. And we're going to go ahead and hop into our first polling question right now, which I will launch. We'll give about 30 seconds for that question, and then we'll get back into our next speaker. As a reminder, please feel free to ask questions at any time. We'll just queue those up for the Q&A period, which will be coming after this next presentation. And we'll go ahead and do our best to get to all the questions asked. If we don't get to all of them, we'll ask the speakers to follow up with you to make sure that you do get an answer. I will leave this out for another 5 seconds here, so if everyone would be, please get their votes in, that would be great. And at this point, we'll go ahead and close that down. And it's my pleasure to introduce our next speaker. Bijal Patel is a senior financial analyst at Cell Therapeutics. Bijal brings over 6 years of experience to Cell Therapeutics, a biopharmaceutical company that uses genomic information to develop a personalized approach to cancer therapy. As a senior financial analyst, she's responsible for budgeting, month-end close activities, and ad hoc analytics. Prior to joining Cell Therapeutics, Bijal worked in various finance roles at Microsoft, Sute, and Spheris, a Nashville-based medical transcription company. She holds an MBA in finance and a BS in computer science from Texas A&M University. And Bijal, thanks so much for joining us this morning, and welcome to our webinar.
Thank you, John. Let me start off by giving you a little background. Cell Therapeutics, we're a small Seattle-based biotech company where we develop, acquire, and commercialize novel treatments for cancer. So I'm just going to dive into why we needed Host. Prior to Host Analytics and implementation of Host Analytics, our budget process was very manual. We relied on Excel and eventually progressed to InfoPath, but it wasn't much of a progression. It wasn't much of an improvement or an advancement. We still were responsible for making, housing our own data on our own database or our own files. And what happened is that this would create a longer budget cycle for our finance accounting departments, not only for the actual budget process, but in preparation of the budget process. Obviously, we would have to get directives and goals from our senior management team to understand what we were budgeting for the upcoming year. But what would happen is finance accounting would have to manually create templates out of Excel or InfoPath, whichever application they're using, to ensure that the directives and goals were reflected appropriately so that when the respective functional departments did receive the templates, they knew what they were budgeting for. This, we would have to give ourselves about a couple of weeks just to make sure that we had everything accurate, everything was correct. This also led to additional manual work, making sure that everything was locked down as far as we could. And whenever the budgets were submitted by the respective functional departments, it was an unwritten rule, but finance was ultimately responsible for the budgets. We were responsible for reflecting the changes within the budgets, not the departments. So there wasn't really a sense of ownership there. The bullet point where it says credibility, what that refers to is that we weren't sure the information we were getting from the departments was accurate in terms of sometimes the template formats had changed to what the department wanted to see. Maybe incorrect FX rates were applied if the activity was not in US dollars, items like that. And it led to an additional time in our process where finance would have to go through a fine-tooth comb to make sure that everything that was reflected data-wise was correct and activity-wise was correct. We would have to go back to the the departments and ask them questions, and sometimes activity would change drastically, sometimes it wouldn't, and this would cause a major lag in our process. And also at the end of each month end, quarter end, and year end, finance is held responsible for variance analysis, or held responsible for budget spend tracking, and it shouldn't be that way, but that's just how it was assumed that finance would take care of that. Therefore, the departments really did not have an insight into how they were tracking against their budget, how their spend. Finance would, gather all the additional budget fund requirements, and there was no assistance or even ownership, as previously stated, from the department. So after we implemented Host Analytics, the reasons why we chose it is because, one, it was a web-based application. We didn't have to worry about Excel templates. We didn't have to worry about InfoPath templates. We didn't have to worry about creating our own databases or our own files to make sure that everything was captured appropriately. Also, with the web-based application, the allocated users, the users of this application, can go into the application at any time and capture whatever information they need. They can capture their board-approved budgets at any time. They can capture, the respective month's actuals to complete their own variance analysis. They can report their budget track spend to their management team in a timely manner. The other benefit was that it was identical to Excel. So because Host Analytics, it was very easy, so the most basic Excel user could populate a budget template, and it gave us, or it gave the department, the ability to budget to whatever granular detail level they felt they needed. It's easier for during budget process review, or budget review, excuse me, because management then knows what exactly has been budgeted for. Previous to Host Analytics, it may have been a lump amount, and no one really knew what was in that number. Now the department is able to identify ABC activity totals to this amount. The development and deployment of budget templates obviously is much quicker. We're not manually creating anything. Directives or goals may change for the future, budget process. That's fine. It doesn't take us that long to update the templates. And the great thing about it is that you update one template, you've pretty much updated all templates that are tied to that. So we didn't have to go through each individual template, save, and recreate. Workflow. There's a workflow process that we really appreciated, where it now gives each department their own sense of ownership, and they're given, they're asked the questions. They're asked what's going on. Why are you budgeting this way? Finance is no longer asked that. It provides additional analysis. Now that we have time, rather than actually creating the templates and making sure they're correct, we actually have time to analyze the budget data that's come in. We actually have time to kind of think of the budget and what's been submitted in a different manner, rather than keep asking if it's correct. Again, the departments are held accountable for their annual budgets now. They are responsible. They have submitted their budgets. They have looked at it. The workflow, it shows they've approved it, and now they know what variances they should have, or if it's an unknown variance, they can research it themselves. The other good thing is that not only for finance, but we feel that for the other departments as well, the ad hoc reporting, it's a lot easier, and it's quite simple. Just click and drag of a few fields, and you've got your report, and you can make it mirror any way. We also liked it that if management asked for reports or had an impromptu activity that they needed information right now, it doesn't take finance long to pull it together. We can, give us an hour and we can pull a series of reports, which would take us days, maybe even a week to pull previously, because everything was Excel-based. And then credibility of information. This one, it really cut our time in half, or I would even say more, because we're not questioning FX rates. We're not questioning, has the information been put in the correct bucket. We can easily identify that now and go back to the department and ask them to correct. Finance is no longer correcting it for them. So for future, plans, I think right now, just for us, we would like to make the tool more, provide or have more of the enhancements than we already have right now. But for us, it's just pretty novel. It's a novel idea. We log on to a website, ultimately a hosted solution website, grab the information you need, and anybody can grab it. And that's just the new idea. Again, it was previously finance was doing all the work. They were pulling all the reporting. They were putting all information together, and there was always fear, the department stating, well, this doesn't look right. Now it's the department's responsibility. Qualitative reactions. Initially, we were afraid that the acceptance of this new application would not be received well. Nobody likes change, but to our amazement, it was actually received quite well. Other users have stated that it's easier to use. They can go out, they can grab the information when they need the information. They don't have to rely on anybody. They know it's accurate. They know the ending budget number is what they truly submitted. It is not what finance was requested to update the changes that's prior to host analytics, but now the actual department head or the application user knows, oh yes, that's right, I did make that change, I did update that number, and there's no questionability about it. And that's it. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Bijal, for that. So we'll go ahead and jump into the second of 3 polling questions before we get into the Q&A. So I have just launched the second polling question. We'll have a third polling question after the Q&A. So go ahead once again and hit these. And as always, we do appreciate everyone answering this. It's 10 seconds to read and answer this. So would appreciate that participation. Feel free also to ask questions at any time. And we will do our best to get to those questions during our Q&A period, which is just about upon us. Also, I'll take a moment to remind folks that after today's webinar, we'll ask for about 60 seconds of your time to take a post-event survey. We really appreciate getting that feedback from everyone, and it helps us do better in future webinars. And also, if you would like to connect with either of today's speakers or today's sponsor, it's very easy to request that in that post-event survey. So I'll go ahead and close this out now, and we'll go ahead and get into the Q&A section of today's event. So first question is out to Bijal, which is how long was the process that you went through determining what platform you should be looking at as an alternative to the way things were on Excel, et cetera?
I would say we started in December of last year, just like initial viewing, and then we had our own internal, pickups that came through in terms of management requests and whatever. But I think as a total, it took us from start to finish maybe about 5 to 6 months roughly, from selection of vendor, maybe even longer than that, selection of vendor till the full final implementation. I would say about 5 to 6 months. We had one of the great things.
I'm sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh no. One of the great things we did have is we had hosts come out and actually perform the training for us for our departments at our company.
So can you split that time period? It sounds like about 6 months thereabouts, which was everything from system selection to implementation. How long was system selection and how long was implementation?
I know implementation was most of it. I would say 4 months, maybe 5 months of implementation, and then maybe a month or 2 months of selection.
Okay.
And there were negotiations involved in that as well. So. Okay.
Alex, how long do you guys see it typically takes for sort of a mid-size or average company? I know it's hard to state average, but to implement, cloud-based planning solutions.
Yeah, so there's there can be a range. Probably the fastest we've seen is 2 weeks. Schumacher Group was actually live on their data in 2 weeks. That's, I think, one of the best cases. I'd say average case really depends on which modules you're implementing. If you're just doing kind of vanilla budgeting and forecasting, those tend to go very quick. If you also have a need for consolidation, maybe some more advanced reporting, that'll take longer. We tend to advise, without knowing the situation, expect 6 to 8 weeks. We can move faster if you could move faster, and it really depends on the amount of software you're buying and the process.
And does that? I'm sorry. Does that include integration into an ERP system, for instance, or a financial system to pull actuals, et cetera, in that time frame?
Yeah. Generally it does. Integration is always a topic we'll bring up in the statement of work process, and it almost always is part of the conversation. I think most vendors these days, they know they can't be point solutions. It's got to be easy to move data around, and we certainly have some interesting options there with basically direct connectors to many of the most common GLs and ERPs. So yeah, absolutely good question. But it should be integration is a topic that needs to be covered in the evaluation and addressed in the statement of work process.
Okay. Bijal, back to you. What was the biggest obstacle to your implementing this solution, be it people like IT folks who wouldn't get out of the way of a cloud solution, or process, things that didn't translate well into a new solution, or technology issues. So out of people, process, and technology, what did you find to be the major roadblocks? That can be plural if there are multiple.
I think ours was predominantly it was a people issue. Just getting finance and IT on the same page as to requirements, what was needed, what needed to, be looked into, what IT was responsible for testing, what finance was responsible for testing. One of the main things we liked about Host Analytics is that we did not need to have our internal IT support on this application at all. We had a team of 3 people from finance who were basically implementing the entire application, so that's why it took so long. But it was a lot of, just going back and forth with our IT department, informing them, that whatever their standard qualification processes they needed were really not necessary.
So did they advise, did they have input and insights in the whole on-premise versus cloud thing, et cetera? How interactive was that discussion during, say, the selection phase?
Not too much. It was more of finance pretty much making the decision. We had done really, very much in-depth research in terms of what we needed, what were required to make this a successful process and application. So we didn't really have too much involvement with IT for that.
So Alex, this is a familiar story. This is kind of the brave new world of finance applications, or so it seems. Are you guys finding with the majority of your clients that IT is there in sort of a limited support role, if at all, these days?
Well, I would actually say things have shifted quite a bit over the last few years. Nowadays, we're less and less surprised when we walk into a company and we have the CIO and the CFO sitting together, and their arms are basically locked together, and they know about the cloud. They want to go to the cloud, and in some cases we have IT advocating for the cloud. I'll say, I don't know if I could put a percentage figure, probably around 25 to 40% of the companies we walk into, it's like that. I'd say there's maybe the silent majority where it's somewhere in between, where it might be a finance-led initiative, and IT might be a little reticent in the beginning, but as they learn more, they endorse it. And there's still a couple holdouts of companies that are, fearful of the cloud, but we see that diminishing pretty quickly over the last, couple of years.
Okay. And actually, in sort of a related topic, Bijal, security, is still an issue. Probably not as much of a stopping issue as it was 5 years ago. But did you guys think about security of a cloud-based app and redundancy, and do you have backup plans if things go wrong? With your access to the cloud, et cetera. Was that much of a consideration for you?
I don't think so, not too much. It might be a consideration a little bit down the road, but not in the initial stages, not when we implemented it, no.
Mm-hmm. Alex, are there any statistics out there for major cloud-based providers and uptime?
Yeah, most vendors will have their stated SLA on uptime. Usually it's 99.5 or somewhere thereabouts. And then they have their actual uptime, which is usually almost always better than their SLAs. In our case, it's 99.9%. Sometimes you see it go out 2 or 3 nines. And most companies, as you engage with them, they'll know that information. You should ask it and vet it out. Then there's, of course, some of the third-party accreditation companies. There's actually quite a few. The one that we comply with is called SSAE 16, SOC 1 and 2. Your IT team will know what that means. And all sorts of other, I'd call them third-party verifications. So, always ask for those things. It's always good to see them. Companies that have now been in business in the cloud for 5, 10 years, you can bet they've been asked before, and they've been basically stress tested by some of the biggest IT organizations that there is. So always good to double check. Don't take anything for granted. Make sure the T's are crossed and the I's are dotted.
Right. Another question for Bijal. Bijal, does your company have global operations or outside of the U.S. operations?
Yes, we do in Europe.
So did you have any need to handle different languages, different currencies, different accounting regulations, et cetera, and was that a consideration in your tool selection and implementation?
Yes. So we did have to consider, various currencies such as Euro or GBP, but our international side is basically Euro. So
okay.
With that implemented, it was easier for us, and credibility-wise, just knowing that whatever was entered in terms of budget was probably a little bit more accurate than previously submitted.
And do you use any third-party services that might feed in things like currency rates and to help automate that part of the planning process?
No, we do not.
Okay, gotcha. Okay, well, great. At this point, I think we're going to go ahead and get into final items here and make sure that we get everyone out of the event on time. We like to start and finish on time at these. So we've got a few housekeeping items. We do have our last polling question also coming up in a moment. Number one, you will be prompted to take a short survey, so we appreciate you giving us just that extra 60 seconds. That will come right after the third polling question. If you want to continue the conversation, I know Alex has mentioned Proformative a couple of times. We do have a lot of conversations on this side about budgeting, planning, rolling forecasts, platforms, the works. It's all peer-to-peer stuff with no selling or self-promotion on the site, so that's a great resource. Also, if you do have any questions about CPE credits, please contact Chris Brower, and you can see her email address right there at the bottom. Next up, just a quick shout out, Proformative has a tech conference, a pure finance, accounting, treasury, and related tech conference coming up. It's March 20th at the Hyatt SFO. It is, like all things Proformative, free. It's amazing. We've got the number of CFOs, CFO of JDSU, CFO of Mozilla, and a whole host of other CFOs and treasurers and controllers coming to talk at this event, and you'll be able to see a lot of technology under one roof. We're very excited about that, and we invite you to check out more about the conference and register at performatech.com. Next up, let's thank everyone involved. First off, a great thanks to Bijal Patel and Alex Ortiz. Thanks so much for your time and the insights this morning. We greatly appreciate it. Great content, very well delivered, and thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thanks to Host Analytics for sponsoring this event. We greatly appreciate their support. They allow us to do what we do at Proformative, which is provide great peer-based information to our users for free, which is a wonderful thing. Also, thanks to everyone who gave us an hour of your time this morning. We know how busy you are, and we greatly appreciate you spending this hour with us. We hope to see you again at another Proformative event or online at performative.com. Now, at this point, we're going to go ahead and put out the third and final polling question, and you'll see it launching right now. And as I'll give 30 seconds for this question as well. And once again, we appreciate everyone taking this poll. It's very, very quick. And as soon as we're done with this, we'll hop into the post-event survey. So we do appreciate you staying, giving us that extra 1 minute for feedback on this event. Thanks in advance for doing that. I will go ahead and leave this poll out for another 5 seconds, make sure everyone gets a chance to participate there. And I'll go ahead and close it out at this point. Once again, thanks to everyone who joined us today. We really appreciate it. Hope to see you again. I'll go ahead and close out the webinar, and hopefully you'll stick around, give us that 1 minute for the survey. We make it real easy to connect with today's speakers as well in that process. So thanks. Take care, everyone. Have a great week, and we hope to see you soon.